The cop thought he could humiliate a black man in uniform without consequences, until he made a phone call that left the cop stunned and devastated. Highway 231 stretched like a silver thread cutting through the quiet back roads of South Carolina. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting flickering shadows across the pavement. Soft, familiar, almost peaceful. A black SUV moved steadily along the road, guided by the sure hands of a man who had seen far more dangerous paths. Clinton, a lieutenant general in the U.S. Army, wasn't a stranger to roads like this. He had driven through deserts in Iraq, over treacherous mountain passes in Afghanistan, and down midnight highways with no lights but instinct. But today, on this peaceful southern stretch of America, he was about to face something none of his training had ever quite prepared him for. A confrontation not with violence, but with assumption. His GPS had gone haywire after a system update. Frustrated, he spotted a gravel pull-off near an old utility station and gently eased the vehicle to a stop. The SUV idled quietly. He removed his seatbelt, reached for his military-issued encrypted phone, and began to recalibrate the route. He wore a plain polo shirt and khakis. His uniform, complete with rank insignia and a Department of Defense seal, was neatly folded in the back seat. He hadn't thought he'd need it. Clinton wasn't a man who relied on titles. He believed dignity wasn't worn on the shoulders. It was carried in how you treat others and how you hold yourself when no one is watching. As he tapped the screen, the silence around him shifted. A faint crunch of tires on gravel drew his gaze to the rearview mirror. A faded patrol car had pulled in behind him. Its emergency lights flashed silently. No siren, just color and authority. Stenciled on the door was Sumter County Sheriff. A female officer stepped out. Tall, blonde hair in a tight bun, sunglasses. One hand rested casually on the grip of her holstered gun. Clinton stayed calm, but something in the air had changed. This wasn't a routine check. This wasn't just a stop. It was the beginning of a test. Not of his credentials, but of his composure. A test not of his authority, but of how he would respond to being seen as less on the very soil he had sworn to defend. Clinton sat quietly in his vehicle, one hand holding his phone, the other resting gently on his knee. His breathing was steady, his gaze fixed on the rearview mirror, where the image of the approaching patrol car sharpened under the fading southern light. The car door creaked open. A tall female officer stepped out. Blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, mirrored sunglasses hiding her eyes, one hand resting on her sidearm. Her posture wasn't cautious, it was commanding, and there was no greeting, no badge flash, no polite question, just 3 hard knocks on the window. Knock, knock, knock. Clinton rolled the window halfway down, his voice calm. "Good afternoon, officer. Is there a problem?" She didn't answer. Her eyes scanned him, then swept across the interior of the SUV. Her tone, when it came, was clipped and cold. "What are you doing here?" Clinton didn't flinch. He had heard this voice before, in meetings where respect was selective, in boardrooms where skin color whispered louder than credentials. "I pulled over to check my GPS," he replied evenly. She frowned, glancing past him again. "This is private property, known site for illegal dumping. You match a description." "A description?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped back and unclipped the snap on her holster. "Step out of the vehicle, now." Clinton took a breath, then spoke as a soldier, not a suspect. "Officer, I'm a federal officer. My identification is in the briefcase behind the passenger seat. With your permission, I'll retrieve it." But she wasn't listening. "Out now." The moment had turned. What had been silence was now loaded with tension. The kind of tension Clinton had known overseas, but never expected here, in his own country, on a quiet roadside, in civilian clothes. He stepped out slowly, hands visible. "I just want it clear," he said evenly. "I've done nothing wrong." She responded without hesitation. "You're being uncooperative." Clinton blinked, not in fear, but in something deeper, the realization that his calm was being twisted into defiance. She led him to the back of his vehicle. No backup, no body camera. Just a quiet stretch of road and a woman determined to assert control. "Hands on the trunk." "Ma'am," he said carefully, "as I mentioned, I'm a federal officer. My ID is in the vehicle, please." She cut him off. "Now." A pause, then he complied. Hands on the trunk. A soldier's discipline. Silent. Controlled. She kicked his legs apart. And in that moment, Clinton wasn't a general. He wasn't a public servant. He wasn't even a citizen in uniform. He was just a man, reduced to a suspicion because of what someone thought they saw. The cuffs snapped shut with a sharp metallic click. Cold, tight, final. They bit into Clinton's wrists, rough against skin that had once worn the stripes of command with quiet pride. He didn't flinch, didn't resist, just closed his eyes for a beat, not in pain, but in restraint. Because restraint was something he had mastered long ago, in deserts and war rooms, in conversations where silence held more weight than shouting ever could. Officer Gloria pressed him against the back of his SUV, firm and unforgiving. "You're obstructing an investigation," she said sharply. "I followed every instruction," Clinton replied, his voice calm but low. "I told you who I am. I asked to show my credentials." She didn't respond. She didn't want answers. She wanted control. Across the road, a father and his teenage son stood watching. The boy held up a phone, still recording. They didn't interfere, not yet, but their expressions shifted, from confusion to concern to something harder. This didn't feel right, even to strangers. Gloria noticed the camera and barked toward them. "Stay back! This is official police business." The man didn't move. His arms remained crossed. "Then act like it," he said quietly. Clinton stood motionless, hands behind his back, cuffs digging in. He turned his head just slightly, voice still composed. "I commanded over 3,000 soldiers in Fallujah, but today I'm treated like a threat, on my own soil." Gloria pulled his wallet from his pocket, flipping quickly through the cards like she was searching for an excuse, not an explanation. And then she froze. Tucked behind his federal ID was a Pentagon-issued clearance card. Level 4, not something easily forged, not something carried by civilians. She blinked, jaw tightening. "Is this real?" Clinton didn't break eye contact. "I don't need you to believe it. I need you to verify it." Her grip faltered, but pride held her tongue in place. She looked for a way out, a rule to cling to. "Well, you still can't park here," she muttered. Clinton let out a quiet breath, part fatigue, part disbelief. "I wasn't parked. I stopped to fix my GPS. That's all." She turned away, retreating behind her patrol car, voice hissing into the radio. "Requesting backup to County Line Road. Possible non-compliant subject, male, possibly armed." That was the tipping point, not the cuffs, not the force, but the lie. Clinton turned toward the camera across the street. His voice was steady, not for Gloria, but for the people watching. "I need to make a phone call." She didn't reply, but the camera caught it. The boy zoomed in on Clinton's wrists, on the stars embroidered on the collar of the jacket in the back seat. And somewhere in that lens, a quiet truth began to stir. Because this wasn't about one officer and one man anymore. This was about every moment a person's worth was questioned by assumption, and every second someone stood tall, even in handcuffs. Clinton stood still behind the SUV. His hands were still cuffed, his stance straight, his expression unreadable. But beneath the surface, something was shifting, not in him, but around him. The power dynamics were changing. "I'd like to make a phone call," he said, eyes fixed on Gloria, who was now pacing near her patrol car, radio pressed to her mouth, voice shaky with half-formed codes and unnecessary escalation. She didn't respond, but the man across the road did. The father who had been watching since the beginning. He stepped forward, voice calm, southern, unwavering. "Let the man call." Gloria hesitated. For the first time, her posture lost its edge. She didn't get permission, but she didn't say no either. Another deputy had arrived moments earlier. Deputy Marcus, a broad-shouldered black man who hadn't drawn his weapon, who hadn't made assumptions. He handed Clinton his personal phone without a word. "Just one call, right?" Clinton nodded, fingers stiff from the cuffs but steady. He dialed the number from memory, no hesitation. "This is Lieutenant General Clinton Warner. I'm being unlawfully detained by local law enforcement in Sumter County, South Carolina. I need immediate identity verification and military contact." On the other end, a calm voice responded, "General Warner, are you secure? I'm in cuffs. I'm being recorded by multiple witnesses. The situation could escalate. I need federal confirmation dispatched now." A moment of silence. Then another voice came through. Clipped, direct, authoritative. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Monroe. General, we have your location. Federal response is inbound. Hold position. Do not engage." Clinton exhaled. Not relief, not vindication, just readiness. This wasn't about him anymore. It hadn't been for a while. 9 minutes later, the low hum of engines approached from the south bend of the road. 3 black SUVs, no markings, windows tinted darker than legal, rolled in like shadows with purpose. The kind of vehicles that didn't ask for space. They took it. Doors opened. Agents in dark suits stepped out, and from the lead vehicle, a man in full dress uniform emerged. Colonel Irwin Reese, well known in military circles. Unknown to Gloria, and yet in that moment, more powerful than any badge on her belt. He walked past the patrol cars, past the deputies, past the watching crowd, straight to Clinton. "General Warner," he said, firm but measured. "Are you all right?" Clinton nodded. Physically, yes. Reese turned to Gloria, who had gone pale, her hands now nervously resting on her belt. Nowhere near as confident as before. "Do you know who this man is?" he asked plainly. Gloria straightened her back. "He didn't provide proper ID. He was evasive. He fit a profile." Reese didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You had his federal identification. You detained a 3-star general without cause, and you're being recorded by at least 6 civilians." She looked around. The phones were still up. The eyes were still on her. The story was no longer hers to shape. Reese turned back to Clinton. "Do you wish to press charges?" Clinton paused, looked out at the quiet crowd, at the teenager holding the camera, still steady, at the father beside him, at the silence that had turned from passive to powerful. "Not yet," he said. "I want it handled the right way. Let them see it. Let them decide." Reese nodded, because that was enough. This wasn't just a correction. This was a moment of reckoning, and it had started with one phone call. A call not made in anger, but in truth. And truth, once spoken, doesn't return empty-handed. Clinton stepped out of the patrol car with quiet resolve. He didn't rush. He didn't speak. His wrists, still red and slightly swollen from the cuffs, remained behind him for a moment longer, not out of submission, but as if to let the world witness what had been done. He didn't rub the marks, didn't demand an apology, because the hurt wasn't in the wrists, it was in what they represented. Across the road, the small crowd had grown. People no longer just watched. They remembered. They recorded. They bore witness. Gloria stood by her cruiser, hands stiff at her sides, posture tense, eyes darting between the phones pointed her way, and the man she had wrongfully detained. The confidence that once marked her every step had dissolved. Now she looked like someone grasping for control in a story no longer hers to tell. Minutes later, a silver SUV pulled up. Out stepped Sheriff Raymond Calloway, a veteran lawman with gray hair, a weathered face, and a reputation for quiet authority. He scanned the scene, looked at Clinton, then at Gloria, and said firmly, "General Warner, I'm Sheriff Calloway. On behalf of my department, I offer you my sincerest apology." Clinton nodded slowly. "Apologies are a start," he said, voice calm, "but they don't erase what happened. What matters now is what comes next." Calloway understood. He turned to Gloria, his voice dropping, but not losing any weight. "Officer Tracy Gloria, hand me your badge and firearm. Effective immediately, you're placed on administrative leave pending full investigation." Gloria stiffened. "Sir, that wasn't a request." With hands that had once gripped power tightly, she now slowly unclipped her badge and weapon, placing them in the sheriff's open palm. He didn't look at her, just closed his fingers around the items, like closing the chapter on something broken. Colonel Reese stepped beside Clinton, offering quiet support, but Clinton declined the escort. He took a few steps forward, his gaze sweeping across the gathering crowd. That's when a voice called out, soft but steady, "Sir, thank you for staying calm." It was the teenager, still holding the phone, but now lowering it, eyes filled with respect. Clinton gave a faint smile. "You didn't have to know who I was to know what was wrong," he said. "You just had to be watching." Then, with no speeches, no final words, he walked back to his car, the same one he had been pulled from. The military jacket with its stars still lay neatly folded on the back seat. He didn't put it on. He didn't need to, because his dignity didn't come from the uniform. It came from how he chose to carry himself when everything else was stripped away. That night, the South Carolina skies softened under the weight of everything that had just unfolded. In a quiet bedroom just outside town, Miles Reardon, a teenage boy with steady hands and a sharp sense of right and wrong, clicked upload. The video was 2 minutes and 34 seconds long. No edits, no music, just shaky footage of a man in cuffs, standing calm, while the world watched in silence. Its title read, "They didn't know who he was, but he did." 12 hours later, the video hit over 1 million views. By midday, it was on the homepage of local news outlets. Then it spread, state by state, screen by screen, until even national anchors quoted the moment a man stood still, not because he was powerless, but because he understood exactly how powerful restraint could be. Hashtags followed: General Warner Justice in Uniform, Stand Still, Speak Loud. People didn't share the video out of outrage alone. They shared it because of how Clinton didn't flinch, didn't fight, didn't fold, and yet moved a nation. They called it the Quiet Stand. The Sumter County Sheriff's Department issued a bland statement. "We are aware of the incident involving Officer Tracy Gloria and an unidentified civilian. The matter is under internal review." But no one believed he was unidentified. He was Lieutenant General Clinton Warner. He had served 5 administrations, led missions across 3 continents, and commanded thousands, only to be profiled on the side of a road. In classrooms, teachers began using the video in civics discussions. They asked students one question. If you had been there, what would you have done? It was simple, but powerful, because most people had been there, watching. Only one person filmed. Only one stood still. Prayer circles formed at the pull-off spot. No megaphones, no signs, just candles and quiet whispers. He didn't kneel, he didn't run, and we won't turn away. Veterans, black, white, and everything between, sent letters to Congress calling for mandatory bias awareness training in law enforcement and specific protocol when engaging with military personnel. Clinton himself stayed out of the spotlight. No press, no posts, only one appearance at a leadership conference in Tallahassee, Florida. He wore no uniform, no medals, just a dark suit and a steady voice. I've stood in battlefields and briefed presidents, he told the crowd of teachers, first responders, and students. But I've never felt smaller than I did on that roadside. And still, I carry no anger. He looked out into the sea of eyes, all holding their breath. What this country needs is not more rage. It needs more truth and the strength to stay calm when everything else pushes you to lash out. The room didn't erupt in applause. It stood in silence because they didn't need to clap. They just needed to understand. Days later, Officer Gloria was officially terminated. The report cited excessive force, failure to follow protocol, and conduct unbecoming of her badge. A retired officer said on a news segment, she lost control, but more than that, she forgot that in today's world, justice is often held in the hands of bystanders with cameras. Miles, the boy who filmed it all, was invited to Washington, D.C. to receive a Civic Courage Award. When asked why he filmed, he said, I didn't know who he was. I just knew something wasn't right. And I thought, maybe I should do something. That night, back at Fort Jackson, Clinton sat alone on the steps of the barracks, sipping tea that had gone lukewarm. The stars above were quiet. So was he. The mark on his wrist had begun to fade. But something else stayed with him. Something stronger. The certainty that sometimes the most powerful protest is simply standing still while everyone else is watching. 3 weeks later, the headlines had faded, but the story hadn't. It lingered, not in the news cycle, but in conversations quietly unfolding in classrooms, community centers, and kitchen tables across the country. Lieutenant General Clinton Warner was no longer just the man in the video. He had become a mirror, reflecting not just what had happened to him, but what continued to happen to so many who didn't have his title, his training, or a camera nearby. At Fort Jackson, Clinton returned to his routines. No press, no speeches, just discipline, duty, and quiet leadership. One morning, standing before a new class of cadets, he spoke without notes. You'll wear this uniform with pride, but don't mistake it for protection. The only thing that truly guards you is how you carry yourself, when no one's looking and when everyone is. A young woman raised her hand. Sir, how did you stay calm that day? Clinton gave a faint smile. Because my life wasn't in that moment. It was in everything I'd lived before it. Beyond the gates, change had begun. Police departments held new training sessions. School boards approved curriculum around implicit bias and accountability. People didn't just share the video anymore. They talked about what it meant. And Gloria, the former officer, quietly disappeared from public view. No press statements, no redemption tour, just silence, the kind that follows reckoning. Clinton never raised his voice. He never pointed fingers. He simply stood, tall, quiet, and unwavering. Because he knew, sometimes the world doesn't need more noise. It needs someone strong enough to stay still while everything else trembles. True strength doesn't lie in shouting the loudest or in wearing a badge, or holding the highest rank. It lies in how we hold ourselves in the face of disrespect and how we choose to respond when treated unfairly. Lieutenant General Clinton Warner didn't resist, didn't try to prove anything. He simply stood tall, stayed silent, and let the truth speak for itself. That quiet strength sparked a wave of awakening, not through outrage but through dignity. We can't stop others from making false judgments about us, but we can choose not to let them define who we are. When you hold on to your self-respect in the midst of chaos, you don't just protect yourself, you inspire others to reflect on what's right. Sometimes change doesn't begin with a fight. It begins with one person, willing to stand still when they had every right to rise up.